I wasn't expecting anyone. It was New Year's Eve, and I'd come up to my family's cabin alone, thinking I'd spend the night drinking spiked cider and watching the snow fall in absolute silence. No midnight parties, no fake resolutions, just peace. So when I heard tires crunching in the snow outside, followed by a low, sputtering engine noise and then complete silence, I froze. At first I thought it was my imagination, but then came a knock at the door. Not urgent, just hopeful. I opened it and nearly choked on my drink. Standing there, shivering, cheeks flushed red from the cold, was Declan Sanders. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. Not since high school. He looked the same in all the wrong ways. Scruffy jaw, hoodie under a denim jacket, always a little bit wet from rain or snow, like he walked through weather instead of around it. "Hey," he said. "Sorry, my car broke down a little up the road. I saw lights and figured—" He trailed off, eyes flicking past me to the interior of the cabin. I stepped aside before I could think better of it. "Come in before you turn into an icicle." He did, kicking snow off his boots on the mat. His jacket was soaked. His hair was damp and curled slightly at the ends. He smelled like gasoline and the kind of cold that sinks into your skin. And yet somehow, the cabin felt warmer with him inside. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said. Declan looked up from where he was unzipping his jacket. "Same. I thought this place would be empty." "It was supposed to be." I paused. "You're heading up to the Richards cabin?" "Yeah. Or was." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Pretty sure my radiator's toast. No cell signal either." "You can stay here. It's not like I've got a packed guest list." He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "You sure?" I shrugged, trying to play it casual. "It's New Year's Eve. I'm not letting someone freeze to death in a snowbank just because we haven't spoken since graduation." He gave a soft chuckle at that, the tension in his shoulders relaxing just a little. We didn't talk about why we hadn't stayed in touch. About the fact that we were close once. Stupid close. The kind where you sneak beers in the woods and talk about everything except what really mattered. We also didn't talk about the last time we saw each other. Senior year. That night by the lake when I thought he was going to kiss me. And then he didn't. Instead, I showed him to the guest room, made some tea, and stoked the fire. The snow kept falling outside, thick and slow. No one was getting in or out tonight. And then, sometime after midnight, when the fire was just embers and the countdown had long passed, Declan knocked softly on my door. He stood there in a t-shirt and sweatpants I'd loaned him, looking unsure in a way I wasn't used to seeing from him. "Can't sleep," he said. I nodded, stepping aside. Declan walked in like he wasn't sure he was allowed to. I was still sitting on the edge of the bed, a half-drunk mug of cider in my hands, mostly gone cold. He glanced around the room, then back at me. "You always keep it this quiet up here?" "Usually. I don't mind it." He nodded slowly, like he didn't know what to do with his hands. Then, after a pause, he sat down on the floor by the side of the bed, back resting against the wall. It felt weirdly familiar, like we'd done this exact thing before years ago. "Do you remember the night we got snowed in at Jamie's cabin senior year?" he asked, his voice low. I looked at him. "Yeah, you and I were the only ones who didn't pass out before midnight." "I remember thinking it was the best night of my life," he said, staring at his knees. "Not because of the party, just you." That hit harder than I expected. I laughed, but it came out quieter than I meant. "You never said that," he shrugged. "Didn't know how to." "I was 17. I thought if I even looked at you too long, someone would figure me out." I set my mug down on the nightstand. Declan looked up, his eyes catching mine. "I always thought about that night," he said. "That almost kiss." I swallowed hard. "You remember that?" "Of course I remember," he said. "I wanted to. I couldn't." We sat in silence for a while. The wind had died down outside, but the tension in the room felt louder than any storm. "I used to check your Instagram, you know," he said suddenly. "Just to see where you ended up. You always looked happy. I figured you'd moved on." I blinked. You disappeared. You ghosted the entire town. I was scared, he admitted. Not of being gay, just of what it would mean, of who I'd be if I stayed. That made sense. Too much sense. I had hated him for a while, for vanishing like that. But now, sitting here with him inches away, I realized I never stopped hoping I'd see him again. Declan let out a shaky breath. I don't want to keep messing things up. You're not, I said, voice softer than I meant it to be. He looked at me for a long moment. And then, slowly, like testing to see if the ice would hold, he reached up and rested his hand on my knee. I didn't move away. I didn't want to. I never forgot you, he said. I didn't forget you either. And that was the moment it shifted. Not dramatically, not suddenly. Just everything in the room settled. Like the air had finally figured out which direction it wanted to flow. Like after 5 years of silence, we were finally saying everything we didn't have the words for back then. When he stood up, I thought he was leaving. But he didn't. He sat on the bed beside me. Close. Closer than before. And then he asked, "Can I stay here tonight?" I didn't say yes right away. Not because I didn't want him to, but because the question itself landed somewhere between a confession and a test. Like he was trying to figure out if I still wanted him here, even after all these years, even after everything that never got said. So instead of answering, I just moved over on the bed and pulled back the blanket. That was enough. Declan slid under the covers like he was trying not to break anything. His body was warm, warmer than I expected, and for a few minutes we just lay there in silence, backs barely touching. It was weird, comfortable, a little terrifying. I could feel his breath on the pillow behind me, slow and even. Neither of us spoke. Then his fingers grazed my arm. Tentative. I didn't move. He shifted closer, just enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Are you okay?" he asked, barely a whisper. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He hesitated again, and then, very gently, he pressed his forehead against the back of my shoulder, just the softest contact. Like an apology and a thank you rolled into one. "I missed you," he said. I closed my eyes. We stayed like that for a long time. Nothing happened. No fireworks. No dramatic declarations. Just the quiet weight of his body beside mine, the sound of our breathing slowly sinking, the realization that I wasn't alone anymore, and maybe hadn't been, not really, since the night he almost kissed me. At some point, I fell asleep, and when I woke up hours later, still half in a dream, his arm was draped across my waist. His fingers had curled into the fabric of my shirt, like he'd held on in his sleep, and that's when it hit me. He didn't want to let go. It was still dark when I woke up again, just a faint silver glow seeping in through the snow-fogged windows. I could feel Declan's breath against the back of my neck, slow and even. He hadn't moved. His hand was still on my waist, fingers tangled slightly in the hem of my shirt like he was afraid I might disappear if he let go. For a few minutes, I just lay there, eyes open, heart beating a little too fast. It wasn't the first time I'd imagined this exact moment, him lying next to me, warm and close, but it was the first time it didn't feel like fiction. I turned slowly, careful not to wake him. He stirred anyway. His eyes opened halfway, still heavy with sleep, and when he saw me looking at him, his lips curled into a small, hesitant smile. "Hey, hey!" He blinked a few times and looked down at where his hand rested on my waist. "Sorry, was I?" "It's okay." A pause. "I didn't mean to just cling," he said, voice low. I guess I forgot where I was for a second. I didn't mind. He looked at me like he was trying to believe that. Then his hand moved. A slow, nervous shift. Resting flat against my side now, not hidden or tentative. "I didn't come up here hoping this would happen," he said quietly. I'm glad it did." I nodded. "Me too." Another pause, longer this time. Then he exhaled through his nose, slow and shaky. I should have said something that night. At the lake. I wanted to. I wanted to so bad. I know, I said. I wanted you to. His expression shifted. Something halfway between regret and relief. I was scared, he admitted, of what it meant, of how much I wanted it. You. The last word caught me off guard. I reached out and rested my hand against his chest, felt the thud of his heart just beneath his hoodie. We were kids. I don't blame you. I still think about it, he said. What would have happened if I hadn't chickened out? We might have figured it out sooner, I said. Yeah. He looked down, then back at me. But I'm here now, and for the first time since he showed up, soaked and shivering on my porch, I let myself believe it. He really was here, not some ghost from high school, not some memory I kept rewriting, just here, in my bed, in my arms. And slowly, like he'd been waiting for permission, Declan leaned forward and kissed me. No fireworks. Just warmth, familiar and new all at once. The kiss didn't last long. It wasn't the kind that demanded anything, or even tried to prove a point. It was careful, like a hand reaching out in the dark and hoping not to come back empty. When we pulled apart, he didn't move away. His forehead rested against mine, our breaths falling into rhythm again. I should have done that a long time ago, Declan murmured. I smiled. Yeah. But this timing's not so bad. We lay there for a while, not saying much, the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. Outside, the snow had finally stopped, blanketing the world in that muffled stillness you only get when everything's buried in white. Eventually, I rolled out of bed, throwing on sweats and a hoodie. Come on, I said, nudging him. Let's make breakfast. That's the rule here. Anyone who crashes the night has to do the dishes. He groaned, but followed. In the kitchen, everything felt oddly domestic. Declan made coffee while I fried up eggs and bacon. We moved around each other like we'd done it 100 times before. He bumped his hip into mine when I reached for a plate, and I shoved him back lightly, grinning. It felt good. Easy. After breakfast, we sat on the couch with our mugs, watching the smoke curl from the chimney across the lake. It was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the wood stove and the hiss of wind against the windows. I should probably figure out what to do about my car, he said eventually, but he didn't move. You've got time, I said. No one's driving through that snow today. Besides, I like having you here. He looked over at me. Yeah? Yeah. Something in his shoulders relaxed. He leaned against me, and I let my arm fall around him without thinking. His head fit perfectly into the curve of my neck, like it belonged there. I spent so many nights wondering if I screwed up too bad to ever fix it, he said quietly. You didn't. I think I wanted to believe that, but he trailed off, then laughed softly. I guess it just took a snowstorm and a busted radiator to get me to show up. I smiled, resting my chin lightly on his head. Good thing I was home. And we sat there like that for the rest of the morning. No pressure, no labels, just two people finally giving each other a second shot at something real. That afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, turning the snowy hills outside the cabin into something that looked straight out of a postcard. I kept catching Declan staring out the window like he couldn't believe the view, or maybe like he couldn't believe he was still here. Neither could I, honestly. After lunch, he offered to help chop firewood, which was hilarious because I'd never seen him use an axe before. 10 minutes in, he was out of breath, hands sore, cheeks redder than the firewood itself. You good? I asked from the porch, sipping my coffee. He straightened up, panting. Don't laugh. I'm not laughing. You're totally laughing. Okay, maybe a little. He dropped the axe and trudged up to the porch, brushing snow off his sleeves. You grew up doing this. I'm at a severe disadvantage. I handed him the mug. You're doing fine. He took a sip. and gave me a look. "This is actually kind of great, even the near hypothermia part," I smirked. "Remind me to let your uncle know your trip to his cabin turned into a gay romance novel." He nearly choked on his coffee. "You think this is a romance novel?" I raised an eyebrow. "I mean, guy crashes his car, ends up at his childhood friend's remote cabin, realizes he's still in love with him. Pretty classic setup." Declan looked at me for a long second. "Still in love with him, huh?" I blinked, too late to take it back. But instead of pulling away, he stepped closer. His hand brushed my wrist, slow and deliberate. "That's what this is?" I swallowed. "I don't know. I think it could be." The way he looked at me just then, half amused, half serious, made something twist in my chest. "I'd like that," he said. "If we don't mess it up this time," I nodded. "Then let's not." That night felt different. Not like the awkward, cautious energy from the night before. This time, things were clearer. Lighter. We ate leftovers in front of the fire. Declan stole the blanket. I stole it back. At one point, he fell asleep with his head against my thigh, and I just let him stay there, running my fingers through his hair while the flames popped and cracked beside us. I didn't want it to end. In the morning, the plow truck finally made it through. We could hear the low rumble as it cleared the roads near the base of the hill. Declan's car was still dead, but help wasn't far now. He could call a tow. He could go back to wherever he'd come from. And I'd be here. Unless... We stood on the porch again, like a mirror of that first night. Only this time, he wasn't shivering. He wasn't lost. "What happens when you leave?" I asked, hating the way my voice cracked. He looked down at the snow-covered trees, then back at me. "I don't know, but I don't think I want to go back to before." I waited. He stepped closer. "I meant what I said. About wanting to fix things. About you." I swallowed hard. "You really ready for that?" Declan nodded. "I think I've been ready longer than I realized. I just needed a reason to stop running." He took my hand, fingers curling through mine. And even though it was cold outside, everything in me warmed. "I don't want this to be just a weekend thing," he said. "I want to see what this can actually be." I looked at him, at this guy who'd been both a memory and a what-if for too long. And finally, I said the one thing I'd always wanted to. "Then stay." The snow had stopped, but neither of us moved. We stood on the porch for a long time, hands loosely joined, like we were afraid of what would happen if we let go. There was a silence between us, but not the awkward kind. Just the quiet of two people who finally understood each other better than they did yesterday. "You're really not in a rush to go?" I asked again, needing to hear it twice. Declan shook his head, still looking out over the white-draped forest. "Honestly, for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like running." That struck something in me. Because the Declan I remembered had always been in motion. Even in high school. He couldn't stay still, couldn't commit to plans, couldn't settle down for more than a weekend. It wasn't about fear back then. It was something else. Restlessness. Like if he stopped moving, he'd have to deal with whatever was really going on inside. But now he was standing still. Here, with me. "You can stay as long as you want," I said. He finally looked at me, eyes tired but clearer than I'd ever seen them. "Yeah?" "Yeah." We went back inside and made more coffee. Neither of us had slept much, but we didn't really talk about the night before. We didn't need to. It wasn't about picking it apart or overanalyzing it. It had just happened, and it felt right. We sat on the couch again, side by side this time, shoulders brushing. Declan rested his coffee mug on his knee, staring into the fire. "I keep thinking about how easy this feels," he said quietly. "It shouldn't, but it does." "Why shouldn't it?" He shrugged. "I spent years thinking if I came back, if I ever saw you again, it'd be awkward. Or angry. Or like we were strangers. Do I feel like a stranger?" "No," he said. "You feel like... home." My chest tightened. It was a dumb, sentimental thing to say. And yet, somehow, it was exactly the right thing. Because I felt it too. I had the same tension in my gut when he walked in the door yesterday. The same uncertainty. But it hadn't taken long to realize something bigger than memory had survived between us. "You want to go for a walk?" I asked after a bit. "Now?" "Yeah, while the snow's fresh. I'll grab the boots." We bundled up, layers over layers, hats and gloves and scarves. I gave Declan the good boots, the ones with proper insulation, and he looked at me like I'd just handed him a piece of gold. The trail behind the cabin wound through the woods, leading to a frozen lake about a mile out. It was one of my favorite places, especially in the winter. Everything looked still, like the world hit pause and forgot to press play again. We didn't talk much on the way there. Just walked in silence, our boots crunching in the snow, our breaths visible in the cold air. Every once in a while, he'd bump his shoulder into mine, just lightly. I'd bump him back. It was like we were kids again, walking home from school, killing time because we didn't want to say goodbye. The lake was frozen solid, a wide sheet of silver reflecting the dull winter sun. We stood at the edge for a while, just looking. "I used to come here when things got too loud," I said finally. "My parents would fight sometimes. Nothing dramatic, just tension. And I'd come out here and try to pretend I lived in the middle of nowhere." Declan didn't say anything for a second. Then, "I used to sneak out here too. After you showed me this place." "You did?" he nodded. "Yeah. After that night at Janie's when we almost, you know, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept coming here, just to remember how it felt." I looked at him, heart thudding louder than it should. "Why didn't you ever tell me that?" I asked. He exhaled, breath curling in the air. "Because I was a coward. Because I didn't know what to do with how I felt. Because I figured you'd moved on, and I didn't want to know for sure." I reached out and took his hand. "I didn't move on." He looked down at our hands, then back up at me. "I don't want to lose this again." "Then don't." And for the first time since he showed up at my door, there was no hesitation. He leaned in and kissed me again. This time, it wasn't cautious. It wasn't an apology. It was a promise. And in the middle of a frozen forest, with snowflakes beginning to fall again, I believed it. By the time we got back to the cabin, the sky had turned slate gray, and our faces were pink from the cold. Declan's nose was running, and mine probably was too, but neither of us cared. Something about the walk had shifted things again, deepened the comfort between us, made the air less uncertain. "I can't feel my thighs," he groaned, kicking his boots off inside the door. "That's how you know it was a good walk. That's how you know I'm about to become a popsicle." I tossed him a blanket from the couch. He wrapped it around himself like a cloak, then dropped into one of the big chairs by the fireplace. I busied myself in the kitchen, throwing together a late lunch while the kettle heated up. Soup, bread, tea, nothing fancy, but I kept glancing over at him. He looked so natural there, like he belonged, like I'd just been waiting for the rest of the room to fill in. He caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Nothing," I said, trying not to smile. He leaned his head back against the chair and closed his eyes. "If this is what being snowed in looks like, I'm kinda mad we didn't do it sooner." I set 2 bowls of soup down on the coffee table and handed him a spoon. "It took you long enough." He peeked one eye open. "You waited." "Yeah," stupidly. "No," he said, more serious now. "Not stupid, brave." I didn't know what to say to that, so I sat down next to him instead, and we ate in a quiet that felt warm instead of awkward. After we ate, I grabbed a second blanket and pulled it over both of us. Declan didn't hesitate this time. He leaned in close, his body curling naturally against mine, like it had been doing it for years. His head rested on my shoulder. I could feel his breath, soft and steady. We didn't talk about the future. We didn't need to. But after a while, he said, "I have to go back to the city eventually, tie up stuff." "Yeah, but I'm not going back alone." That made my heart stop for a second. He looked up. "I mean, I don't want to be done with this just because the snow melts." "Neither do I." He nodded like he already knew that. "I'll come back up," he said. "Or you'll come down. Or we'll meet halfway." I nodded too. "We'll figure it out." It felt real now. Not just a snowed-in fantasy. We were making space for something that could last. Something grounded. And for the first time in years, that didn't scare me. That night, we took a hot shower. Not together. Not yet. But we did brush our teeth next to each other like some domestic couple from a movie. He used my towel and left his socks in the hallway. I didn't even care. We ended up in bed again, lying face to face under a thick quilt, the heat from the wood stove filling the room with a sleepy warmth. What if we'd kissed that night? I asked, voice low. I think I would have stayed, he said. Yeah? I think I would have been brave a lot sooner. I reached for his hand under the covers, our fingers locking together with ease. You still can be. He smiled. You too. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling softly at the window panes. But it was a different kind of storm now. A quieter one. We fell asleep like that, facing each other, holding on. And this time, there was no doubt in my mind that we were exactly where we were supposed to be. 3 days later, the snowplow cleared the last stretch of road, and Declan's uncle finally called back. His voice was casual, joking even, like he had no idea Declan had spent the last 72 hours tangled up in the bed of an old friend, who was no longer just an old friend. You still alive? His uncle had asked. Barely, Declan said, catching my eye across the room and smirking. Snow almost got me. But Jake's cabin saved my ass. That night, we packed his things. Well, what little he'd brought. He threw everything in the back of his now jump-started car, but didn't close the trunk right away. He just stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the cabin like it was something more than just a building. Kinda wild, isn't it? He said finally. What is? That this place used to just be a blurry memory, and now I kind of don't want to leave it. You don't have to. He looked over, serious. If I stay, I'm staying for you. I stepped closer. That's the only reason I want you to. He didn't say anything else. He just pulled me in and kissed me slow, like we weren't standing in an icy driveway with steam rising off the hood of his barely functional car. And I knew in that moment, it didn't matter where we went from here. Not really. Whether he stayed or drove back to the city for a bit, whether I followed him in a week, or we figured out the long distance thing for a while, because we'd found our way back once. And we weren't letting go again. 6 weeks later, Declan moved into a tiny apartment across the street from mine. He still left socks everywhere. He still hogged the bathroom some mornings. But now, when he disappeared for 10 minutes, it was to bring back my favorite coffee. When he left the dishes in the sink, he always made up for it with forehead kisses and grilled cheese at midnight. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when we were curled up on my old couch watching some dumb movie neither of us really cared about, I'd catch him looking at me. Really looking, and he'd say, without any kind of irony, I still can't believe you opened the door that night. And I'd smile, every time, and say, me neither.